What's the worst thing you've seen at a wedding? Story 1. Outdoor summer wedding in TX. The groom's 90-plus-year-old grandmother died during the reception. They found out when she couldn't be roused for family pictures. Story 2. Outdoor wedding. Bride gently fed wedding cake to her new husband. Groom shoved cake at his new bride's face so hard that it broke one of her teeth. He kept pushing her until she tripped and fell over backwards. She broke her wrist when she tried to stop the fall. There was blood dripping from her mouth. The groom's father then began to beat the living out of his own son. Good times. Edit. For those inquiring if the couple is still married. We were staying overnight at the small bed and breakfast at which the wedding took place. The mother of the bride invited us and some other hotel guests to the wedding and reception. We have no idea what happened after that day. Story 3. Oh God. My boyfriend's oldest brother's wedding. One of his mates got plastered, lost control of his bowels, and shat himself. In an asterisk kilt asterisk. Picture the scene. On a dance floor at a working man's club in Glasgow. A drunken 40-something standing by himself in an ever-expanding circle of people looking at him in horror, whilst an equally expanding puddle of asterisk asterisk gathers on the floor. On his calves, on his shoes. Yeah, asterisk, yeah. Asterisk edit to add, my boyfriend remembered something which I had asterisk, totally asterisk forgotten. When they began to hit the floor, the groom looked over, saw what was happening, and shouted, "For sake, Mick! Get to the fucking toilet!" The drunken shitter asterisk wailed asterisk back. Ah, canny move. It's coming out too fast. The boyfriend compared it to watching a cow laying out a cow pat. Yeah, asterisk, yeah, asterisk. Story 4. I used to be a wedding registrar. I conducted one wedding where the bride's father had passed away the year before. The ceremony was held outside in a venue's walled garden. Upon entering the garden to take their seats, the guests were met by a skeleton which was dressed up in the father of the bride's clothes and asked to shake his hand. Story 5. It was an overcast day, had rained earlier, but weather was clearing up. Bride and groom went to take some photos after the ceremony. A kid, probably 6 or 7, unsupervised, ran up to a puddle the bride was carefully walking past and jumped in it. Her dress had mud splatter all the way up to her shoulder. I felt so bad for her. Story 6. I told this story in a different thread the other day, but I feel like it also applies here. A friend of mine caused some drama at her own wedding because she wasn't drinking champagne. A bunch of the older ladies on her side of the family noticed and decided the only possible explanation was that she was hiding a pregnancy. They started pointing it out to anyone who would listen, even going so far as to say they see a little bump under her dress. I guess these family members weren't close enough to the couple to know 2 very important details. 1. The bride is a recovering alcoholic. She doesn't drink, ever, not even at her own wedding. 2. The bride and groom had been trying to get pregnant for probably 2 years at that point, and were starting to be resigned to the fact they wouldn't be able to have kids. This was eventually confirmed, but they did not know this at that time. Story 7. At the after-party, the groom spent the whole night watching a basketball game on TV at the bar. Couldn't even be bothered to turn around and say hi to any of the guests. Just sat there at the bar, eyes fixed to the TV the whole time. When it was time for him to make a speech, he just said, "You know, this was supposed to be a special day, but my team lost, so I fucking hate it. Fuck all of you. This sucks." Needless to say, that marriage lasted all of a week or 2. Story 8. The bride's grandfather died while she was walking down the aisle. The ambulance was there in less than 5 minutes, but the paramedics called it after resuscitation failed. They removed the body and, after a brief period of consultation and people pulling themselves together, the wedding ceremony went ahead. No exaggeration, the time between Granddad hitting the floor and the ceremony restarting was less than 45 minutes. I did not attend the reception, but I heard from others that it was a rager. Story 9. Went to a wedding where everything went well. Got to the reception and the alcohol was flowing. My husband and I drank and got on the dance floor. The groom's side were very proper, while the bride's side were quite the opposite. Everyone is dancing when all of a sudden the cousin of the bride grabs the mic and says, "This song is dedicated to your wedding night." He motions for everyone to clear the dance floor and cues the DJ. Madonna's "Justify My Love" starts playing as the cousin starts crawling and rolling on the floor while lip-syncing. It was easily the most awkward moment while everyone stood there watching his overly sexual performance. The song finally ends, and it's dead silence. I will never forget this moment. Story 10. My youngest sister's wedding. One of my sister's friends was wearing quite a short summer dress. She spent the evening sitting in a manner that let it be known that she wasn't wearing any underwear. She waited till someone looked in her direction, pulled up her dress, and spread her legs. Very disturbing, especially given the number of children running around. Story 11 pales in comparison, but a total white trash wedding. By the time the bride and groom got from the church to the reception, 30 minutes the entire wedding party was obliterated drunk. Each of the wedding party was introduced, and were varying degrees of undress. Ties missing, jackets gone, dresses hiked up, barefoot, etc. The B&G were introduced and came walking in. The groom was wearing a bow tie, boxers, and dress shoes, carrying a whiskey bottle. The bride was wearing what I determined were either white panties or a bikini bottom, a white sheer cami, and appeared to be braless under, her veil and cowboy boots carrying a natural light case of beer. Their parents were given the beer and whiskey and proceeded to start drinking. About the time I left with my GF at the time, her co-worker. The bride was dancing with her friends wearing nothing but her new husband's long tux coat, and it often did not cover anything as she kept it unbuttoned. The best man was feeling her up. Her bridesmaids were wearing their dates shirts or coats in their bras and panties while grinding on their obviously turned-on dates. The groom was legit passed out under a table. Story 12. My Sil told us about a wedding she was at where the bride and the groom's mother did not get along. The groom was a workmate of my Sil's husband, and all the work friends knew there was some tension between the two, but did not expect anything to happen. The ceremony went off okay. Groom's mother gave a few killing looks, but nothing was said. At the reception, she started drinking and making comments to her relatives and friends, loud enough for other people and the bride to hear. The groom spoke to her and she quietened down. During the toasts, she made loud noises every time the bride's name was said, but she was mostly ignored. She kept drinking and moving around, talking to different people while the dancing was on. She was sitting at a different table when the bridesmaids brought around pieces of the wedding cake. She told them she didn't want any. Bridesmaid said she would just leave some on the table for the people who were sitting there and put some on the table. Groom's mother shouted, "I told you I don't want any fucking wedding cake!" And with that swept the pieces of cake off the table with the back of her hand. Cake landed on the chief bridesmaid, who shouted back. Groom's mother jumps up, slaps the bridesmaid, and then other people joined, defending their chosen side. My Sil had seen this all happen and was eagerly watching from the sidelines. The groom and his best man stopped the music, stopped the brawling, and split everyone up. He said, "That's it. Wedding's over. Thank you all for coming. And Mum, I never want to see you again." Grabbed the bride by the hand and walked out. My Sil's husband decided it was time for them to leave in case things kicked off again. Story 13. Outdoor reception, summer in PA. Under a huge covered wall-less pavilion, maybe 100 x 200 with a huge fireplace. 250 people. Wind and rain so bad it was soaked entirely under the whole pavilion. A tornado passed within 100 wadis. Wild day. Story 14. Less what I saw, and more what I *did in T*C. The priest forgot to actually marry them. He did the whole ceremony, including a part where he gifted the couple an invisible shovel they could use to dig their way out of problems, and a part where he actually gifted them a painting of people picking potatoes, but accidentally skipped the vows section. He had to get the couple back together after they got back from their honeymoon to perform that section by itself so that the union could be recognized by the church. Story 15. Aunt of the groom got so drunk she stripped naked on the dance floor. She snuck back into the wedding and offered people blowjobs. They had to carry her out wrapped in blankets. Story 16. Late to the party, but this has to be shared. Bride used old film strips from movie edits cast-offs for decor in the table centerpieces. Flowers and film strips at a quirky fun wedding. Looked great, right? She had picked up the box for free and didn't really look at it. Some of the strips were from schlocky sci-fi nonsense. Most of them were. Story 17. A guy showed up to my brother's wedding wearing shorts, flip-flops, and a t-shirt with a picture of a fish on the back with the text, "Can't catch shit fishing team." I couldn't make that up if I tried. Story 18. Bride was a member of the Catholic Church choir who drunkenly accidentally got pregnant with an old friend from college. The priest took the opportunity at their wedding to preach, instead of a homily, a eulogy to fallen moral values and the end of the most magnificent innocence. Then the open bar was changed to cash bar after half an hour, which was too late to start the small riot that was brewing. One of the groomsmen wrote "baby" on board underneath the "just married" on the couple's car, which led to him getting a punch from the bride's uncle, and then a drunken cousin decided the best way to deal with the message was to kick the rear window in, which restarted the riot. Couple later divorced and split the kids up by gender. He took the boys and she took the girl. Edit. Made it clear she was marrying the friend who got her pregnant by adding "at their wedding." Story 19. Husband and I used to play in a tailored band, and we played for many weddings. At one truly memorable one, the bride and groom were already very drunk when we arrived to set up, and they pretty much disappeared for the evening. Their two families sat on opposite sides of the marquee with their backs to each other all night, and nobody from one side spoke to the other. Not a soul danced all evening, so we just played our music amongst ourselves. Goodness knows what the history was between them. At the end of the night, the best man tried to leave without paying us, so our dance caller had to chase him across a field in the dark to get our fee off him. I've often wondered how long that marriage lasted. Story 20. All at the same wedding. Groom doesn't show up until an hour late. Tux does not fit him at all. Bride and groom's toddler son was allowed to play with a toy truck during ceremony around the feet of the bridal party. At one point, lifts the toy truck and slams it into the shin of one of the bridesmaids, drawing blood and interrupting the proceedings for a good 10 minutes. Not to be outdone, The groom is starting to look unwell. He passes out, falling down a small set of stairs. Upon regaining consciousness, he runs out of the small church out the back. 10 minutes goes by, then 20. He returns with his tucked shirt pulled out, unbuttoned and wide open, bearing chest hair and a gut. He returns to the bride, and they finish the ceremony with him like that. Story 21. The priest couldn't pronounce the names of the bride and groom correctly, was painfully unfamiliar with their circumstances, and used the occasion to remind everyone that the Catholic Church stands against abortion and to vote accordingly. Story 22. Wedding of a guy I worked with. At the reception, a friend of the groom decided this was the time he wanted to pronounce his love for his friend's new bride by saying he wanted to eat her. Fight breaks out, groom and friend go to jail. BTW, this wasn't some trailer park wedding. Everyone involved are engineers and we all work together. Story 23. The vegetarian option being a bowl of chips, a toddler getting kicked over by a man having a tantrum about a football score, the bride being left with her 2-month-old baby screaming whilst her husband was blackout drunk, a groomsman having to be pulled away from a bridesmaid's hotel door after he somehow had into his head that she owed him. He sat outside her door harassing her for hours until she had to call the groom for help. Creep. Story 24. I went to an outdoor wedding with a bunch of cans of seltzer and beer available as soon as you showed up. I chilled with my friends, sipping on cans until people started sitting down. We took our seats, but kept chatting and drinking as everyone filled in and waited for the ceremony to start. We realized about 3 minutes in that it had started, just not loud enough to cut through the chatter, and the videographer had been filming the crowd. While my group, the groom's friends OFC, had been openly drinking our Bud Light cans. I felt so immediately trashy. Later, there was a massive argument between the bride and her parents that seemed to be centered around a lack of decorum and Jesus at the event. The groom also spent most of reception complaining to us about the prices of wedding stuff, with detailed price breakdowns included in the complaints. Story 25. My friend's wedding was officiated by her childhood pastor, who went off script and delivered a tangent about how the first marriage is the only legitimate marriage and his church doesn't believe in divorce or second marriages. The groom's dad has been married 3 times, and all 3 wives, mom, stepmom -1, stepmom -2, were sitting in the front row. The pastor had met them all at the rehearsal the previous day. Story 26. White trash wedding. The bride, 3 kids with 3 dudes, had her sister, 4 kids, 4 dudes, as maid of honor. During the part of I will always be faithful, the sister said liar loud enough for all 14 people in attendance to hear. The groom later passed out in his truck during the wedding and a bridesmaid climbed on top and straddled him. The bride pulled her out by her hair and had a fist fight where blood was spilled. The DJL left early, so someone drove their truck into the tent, outdoor wedding with a tent for reception with plywood on the ground, to keep the music going. A full-in cake fight broke out where the whole cake was destroyed. Story 27. My friend's wedding. His mother had a lot of mental health and addiction issues, and he was already iffy on inviting her, but his beautiful, kind bride didn't want him to ever have any regrets about not having his mother there. She showed up 25 minutes late. They had announced not to get in the way of photographers during the ceremony and to try to not have your phone out in the way. Well, she pulled out the biggest iPad I've ever seen in my life and blocked a videographer for a while. Then when they got to the part of the ceremony where they were going to do the sand thing, where you combine the 2 things of sand in a jar, she got up, pulling a giant Ziploc bag of rice from her way too huge purse and just baseball pitched it right into everyone's face. I'm talking hard. Shrapnel. His sister looked just about ready to actually murder her. Bride and groom both disassociated and left their bodies, and everybody else gasped audibly. Finally, another family member got up and very quickly ushered her away. Everyone was slipping and sliding on the way back down the aisle because there was so much rice all over the ground. We laugh now, but it was the most batshit crazy thing I've ever seen at a formal event. Story 28. I'll qualify this by saying I left the wedding early. I have neuro issues that respond very poorly to me being overheated, and I didn't feel great, so I slipped out quietly right at the start of the reception and caught an Uber back to my hotel. If you're wondering how many people dropped from the heat and had to be carted away in ambulances before they finally just called the reception a wrap, 4 downed family members later from heat strokes/heat exhaustion before they were finally like, yeah, this outdoor reception and surprise 105-degree TX spring day aren't making a good combination. It was like 90 minutes after I left when I saw a bunch of people from the wedding coming back. The path to some of the rooms took them right by the pool that I was in. Pool was actually pretty cool still. At first, people were like, people are in the hospital and you're here having a good time, being all about it. But then I'd just be like, AC in my room isn't keeping up, and the pool is the only place I can stay cool. About an hour later, there were like 30 people from the wedding in the pool. I felt really bad for the bride and groom, because I guess they paid a small fortune, several $1,000s, for catering, and there was absolutely nobody there for dinner. Fortunately, the bride had a good head on her shoulders and had the caterers take all of it to a local homeless shelter with attached soup kitchen. Story 29, Second Marriage. The bride wants her toddler son to give her away. The minister asks the kid if he agrees to give her hand in marriage, blah, blah, blah. The kid adamantly shouts, "No!" and runs away crying. I'm sorry, you said worst. This was absolutely the best thing I've seen at a wedding. Spoiler alert, she cheated on him the same way she cheated on her first husband with him. Story 30. Bride was struggling with nerves, so the bridesmaids kept giving her shots. She was too drunk to walk down the aisle. She wasn't at the reception because she threw up on the dress. Story 31. So I wasn't at the wedding, but I was the trauma nurse who attended to the bride. Groom didn't realize those tiered cakes have skewers in them and slammed his wife's face into it. She lost an eye, 2 teeth, and needed more stitches than I can count. Story 32. My crazy aunt cornered me at my cousin's wedding and felt the need to describe, in graphic detail, how my mother told her about the birds and the bees when she was little. Thanks. I almost made it my whole life without that mental image. Story 33. Wedding in upstate Georgia. During the vows, the groom was so nervous he threw up, and I mean projectile puke, all over his bride, the maid of honor, and the preacher. They still laugh about it to this day, but at the time it was pretty bad. It was my wife's niece. She handled it with grace. We have it on tape and we pull it out at their anniversary party yearly. Good times. Story 34. I caught the bouquet. I was 13 at my 17-year-old cousin's wedding. His bride was 16 years old and 5 months pregnant. They were all, "Oh, you're next." Seriously. I was mortified. My parents had to take me home. I thought I was cursed or something. I worried until a friend of theirs, who was also trying to catch the bouquet, married a few months later. When I married at 24, a groomsman puked all down my bridesmaid's back before the wedding. Story 35. Back in the 90s wedding with 2 big Irish families. I was in the band. During the cake cutting, the groom grabs the bride's head and slams her face in the plate of cake. It's never cute or funny, but this was hard and mean. She's ruined and crying. Her father's walks up and cold cocks the groom one-punch knockout. The groom's father starts fighting with the bride's father. Then it is on. The whole place erupted. They sort of sat each family on opposite sides of the dance floor, and within seconds, there were 50 people beating the out of each other on the dance floor. I saw a middle-aged woman in a formal dress jump on a man's back and choke him to the ground. There was extreme violence for about 5 minutes. It seemed much longer. Then it just stopped and everyone went back to their tables and started eating dessert. No. 5 minutes later, we played the electric slide and the dance floor was full. Story 36. Bride's dad got up to announce and congratulated the maid of honor of her engagement. The maid of honor had not been purposed to yet, and the dad ruined the surprise. The same guy, my husband's uncle, also got so drunk at our wedding that he got up and congratulated me and my brother-in-law on our nuptials. Story 37. My cousin's new father-in-law had a heart attack during his speech at the reception. My uncle and I gave him CPR, used a defibrillator, etc., but he died within 10 minutes. Story 38. I doubt anyone will see this so far down, but at my own wedding, one of the groomsman's girlfriends, very tumultuous and fairly brief relationship with cheating on both sides, pulled a chair onto the dance floor and started to give another male guest a lap dance, while virtually no one else was even on the dance floor. Before I could even intervene, my maid of honor's boyfriend turned it into a joke and acted like he was going to give the male a lap dance. Broke up the messiness and made folks laugh, but holy, who the even does that? Story 39. Retired minister here. I officiated a wedding for an older couple, second marriage for both. Halfway through the service, the groom passes out. We drag him to the first pew, put a cold compress on his head. He starts to regain consciousness. We get him some water. The bride turns to me and says, "He's done that at every wedding he's been to since his divorce." Well, duh. Might you have mentioned that earlier? We finished the service with him seated on the first pew. Story 40. The bride getting hammered, drunk, and flashing her titties to the priest and the rest of the guests at the reception. Long story short, the marriage did not make it to the first anniversary. Story 41. One of my older cousin's weddings. About midway through the reception, a small group of crashers made their way in. They managed to score a few drinks and then were asked to leave by someone. I'll call him the leader decided to get mouthy, like over the music loud about not leaving because someone or something. Well, the best man went over and just picked him up and carried him out the exit. The best man was, and still to this day, one of the biggest M affairs I have ever seen, like 6'10" inches and pushing tree fitty of corn-fed farm boy. Needless to say, the crashers followed very quietly behind him. Funny as all. Story 42. Not that bad, but was at a wedding, and the bride's relatives that she never met from South America, her mother had invited them as a surprise, sang several songs to the bridal party. They sang very badly, and the performance lasted about 20 minutes. It was very awkward as they had just started to serve food, so everyone had to pause and watch. Story 43. Bride's cousin wore a Canadian tuxedo, got belligerently drunk, started fucking with hotel staff, and the cops showed up and had to hit him with the taser and arrest him. Before all of this, he was telling me how he will often collect roadkill if it's not too far gone because some of that roadkill is good eaten. Story 44 didn't see this one. It was the talk of my small town for the longest time. One of the families I went to church with had an outside wedding. Someone in the bridal party kick-shooed a cat away. Turns out it was a skunk. Skunk responded exactly as a skunk should. Story 45. Not as big a deal as some of these others, but at my wedding, the maid of honor, bride's sister, didn't show up because she had been arrested for prostitution 2 nights prior. Story 46. The bride and groom wanted End of the Road by Boys II Men for their first dance song. I guess because it was 1992 and that song was everywhere. Even in white as rice, Hertfordshire, where the wedding was. But have you heard the lyrics to that song? How could you love me and leave me and never say goodbye? I just break down and cry. Pain in my head. Oh, I'd rather be dead. Maybe I'll forgive you. They lasted 2 years. She was a wallflower and he would anything with a pair of. A group of us were just looking at each other like the awkward look monkey puppet meme. Story 47. At a wedding reception that some of my brothers and sisters went to, the bride's ex showed up with a gun. He shot and killed the bride, the groom, and then himself. I don't think anyone else was hurt, but still fucked up all around. Story 48. 2 sisters, my cousins, married 2 brothers at the same ceremony. The first couple were beaming, the little brother and sister not so much. He looked like he didn't want to be there, and my cousin was shaking and in tears. Not tears of joy. I don't think that marriage lasted a month. Story 49. My godmother showed up to my wedding in her wedding dress and veil. Between the ceremony and the reception, she punched her husband in the face and disappeared. Turns out she drove home, 350 miles, emptied their house of everything, and filed for divorce. She had always been a little off, but this was over the top. Story 50. At the reception on Sat, bride and groom got super drunk. Cake cutting time. Bride put just a little cake on groom's nose in a playfully manner. Groom somehow didn't register this as playful or even expected, took a fistful of cake in one hand. With the other hand, he took the back of the bride's head and smashed the fistful of cake into her face and ground it in, then laughed like it was funny. Totally the opposite. Gasps from the attendees, then silence. Wrecked her makeup, dress, and drew blood. We all knew he was a... She finally saw it. We were lucky she didn't pick up the cake knife and go after him. Reception stopped. No honeymoon. She contacted a divorce lawyer Monday a.m. Yep, they were divorced soon thereafter. But to this day, she continues to be A as well. Story 51. My cousins, a doctor with her own business in her late 30s, Officiant mentioned how wives should obey their husband 3 times during the speech of vows. The first time I was like, okay, they're going traditional religious here. And then he mentioned obedience again and my eyes rolled all the way back. And then he mentioned it again, and then I was just angry at the display of old school, women are property type of misogyny I was witnessing. Makes my skin crawl to this day just thinking about how gross those vows were. Story 52. My husband's aunt wore a tiara to our wedding. It was at Bolt Castle up in Alexandria Bay, which is a beautiful mansion castle on an island in the middle of a river. It was summer, and we're not the formal wear type, so the dress code was dressy casual. Button up and slacks, polo and nice jeans, whatever. My husband's aunt showed up in her wedding dress wearing a tiara. Thankfully, her wedding dress was blue and basically just an evening gown, but I've seen her wedding pictures and knew what it was. The tiara somehow ended up in the river thanks to my brother Lamau. Story 53. I was a bridesmaid for my brother's wedding. His ex showed up high on X in a white mini dress dancing alone and her kept falling out. This was a really fancy wedding, and the bride begged me not to drag her out, but I had security and 3 groomsmen her out twice. She's lucky the bride wouldn't let me drag her out myself. She wouldn't have come back that second time. My brother still denies knowing her, but I know him better than he does. Yes, they are divorced. Story 54. I used to work in a hotel conference center, so I saw a lot of weddings. One, the groom and best man got into a fist fight before the meal was even served. We never got told what exactly went down, but we did know from the catering staff that the groom had a nose and got it all over the bride's dress, and she spent the rest of the night like that. And groom and best man made up not long after, and party went on. Had a bride pass out in the bathroom. Coworker found her and roused her. She started sobbing that she didn't love the groom and only married him because she was tired of being single. A wedding outside in November, in Canada. A bride walking from her room to the wedding hall with her dad and her dad, lecturing her about how it was her 4th wedding and he wasn't going to pay for any more, so this one better stick. Story 55. About 15 years ago, I was at a wedding at Middlehead in Sydney, Australia. It was a fantastic location overlooking the entrance to Sydney Harbour. There had been storms on and off all day, but the rain disappeared for the ceremony. You could see the storm clouds out to sea, but it was sunny right where we were. The ceremony was like any standard ceremony. Compete with that bit where the celebrant asks, If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. As soon as the celebrant did the pause after asking the question, there was an almighty boom of thunder, by far the loudest we'd heard all day. Everyone laughed about how God apparently didn't approve, but the ceremony continued, and they were married. Anyway, they divorced less than 12 months later, after she ran off with her football coach. Story 56. I saw the priest after the ceremony blowing a groomsman behind an old oak tree at a wedding in Portland. I never said a word about it to anyone, but I did hit on that groomsman's wife that night hoping to have a threesome. Story 57. I worked at a banquet hall for a bit. One time someone was changing their baby's diaper right in the middle of the table while everyone was eating. Nobody else at the table seemed too fazed by this, but I thought it was vile. While cleaning up after, we discovered the unwrapped diapers had been tossed under the table, side down, left a nice stain on the carpet. Story 58. My cousin got so drunk that he was running around the venue in the rain in nothing but his underwear singing Irish drinking songs. He was later found passed out in a volcanic eruption of his pee and vomit. Story 59. Went to a cousin's wedding in the hills of Kentucky. Had to drive through a trailer park to get to the venue, which was honestly a nice cabin given the location. Groom wore a kilt. Their family is German, not Scottish. Bride's dad wore a black dude rag and a wife beater. Had to look nice because he had a funeral to go to afterward. When it came time for the vows, the groom pulls out a pocket knife and cuts his palm as the officiant starts to recite the old god's wedding vows from Game of Thrones. There is an audible gasp and a "what the" uttered somewhere amongst us guests, as none of us knew that would be happening. Reception was held in the same building, with no AC. The meal had many mayo-based salads and pre-mixed meat sauce spaghetti. I love telling this story. Story 60. I missed my little sister's aisle and vows because I was in the parking lot physically restraining my estranged bio mom, who was explicitly told not to come, to keep her from interrupting. Then got yelled at for missing said event, explained what happened, got thanked and cried on by little sister, then drank too much, but not too much. Story 61. A groom that made a dinner speech saying thank you to the parents of the bride for raising her and "I'll enjoy unwrapping her tonight." So disrespectful. Story 62. At a friend's outdoor wedding in the summer, everyone was gathered, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The music began, and the bridal party began walking down the aisle. All went well, and then we all stood up for the bride to make her appearance and walk down the aisle. She did so, all eyes on her. Except when she got to the altar, there was no groom in sight. Turned out that no one thought to notify the groom and groomsmen that the ceremony was about to begin, and they were smoking cigarettes around the corner. The bride was devastated. After several minutes of confusion, they decided to have a do-over for walking down the aisle, but it just felt weird, and you could feel the disappointment. Story 63. I was at a wedding reception that easily had 300+ guests. Each table had a centerpiece with a live betta fish in it. When the lights came on, and the wedding party had left, the mother of the bride was begging the kitchen staff for storage containers because they had like 100 fish and no plan for what to do with them after. I was gobsmacked. I also went home with approximately 20 fish. Story 64. 14-year-old pregnant bride bawling while being walked down the aisle by her parents. The groom wasn't much older. Being forced to play house at that age led to many more kids between them before wife was even 18. Marriage didn't work out. Story 65. My dad wanted a low-key affair, so he decided to marry my stepmom in a tent set up in a field across from his house. My aunt is notoriously late for everything, so the whole 50 or so guests were watching as she and her family pulled up. Aunt was waving at us and briskly walking across the field when she stepped in a gopher hole. It was immediately apparent she snapped her ankle. An ambulance was called, towels and a glass of water fetched. She was telling us to go ahead while she waited, but the ceremony was held until she got placed in the ambulance. As the vows were getting underway, the ambulance was still idling in the background, and you can see it in the video and quite a few pictures. Eternal memories of love and a tib-fib fracture. Story 66. Bride's friend played cello while everyone was getting seated. She clearly was new to the instrument and constantly hit neck hair curling screeches. She then knocked over the sheet music, picked it up out of order, then proceeded to play as if they were in the correct order. Each page led to a new section of a potentially different song. Music came on for the groom's walk, then dead silence for the bride who walked in from side stage instead of down the aisle. That night, I played video games with the groom because the bride went on her bachelorette party. Story 67. At an old friend's wedding, one of the bridesmaids got banged in the bathroom by one of the groom's friends. The husband of that bridesmaid, wondering where his wife disappeared to, caught them in the act and, as one would assume, flew off the handle, but instead of directing his anger at the intercoursing couple, decided to start kicking and punching vehicles at the venue. The venue shared a parking lot with a bar saloon, and the vehicles he started hitting belonged to patrons of that bar. Before anyone could react or say anything, a couple of dudes flew from the bar and proceeded to throw some punches. Police were called, But the only one who went to jail was the guy who caught his wife having with another guy. IIRC, they were divorced shortly after. Funniest thing to me? I remember the guy being super stoked about the open bar when getting there. Talk about a 180 of a night.